Today we're joined by Chris Christensen from the Amateur Traveller podcast. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
So, Chris, thanks for joining us. Did you want to give us a little bit of a background about yourself and Amateur Traveller podcast and what that's all about?
Sure. Amateur Traveller is a predominantly an audio podcast, so there is a iTunes enhanced version with pictures and links, but it focuses on travel destinations. We put it out pretty much every week, about 48 times a year, and we talk about everything from going to Chicago, what should you put on your Chicago dog, to going to Tonga and swimming with whales. So it tends to be about a 35-minute show, and I've been doing it for about 8.5 years. And it is used by Oxford University to teach English, which is just a funny thing. But
wow, that's quite an achievement. I see that you've had I think over 6 million downloads of the podcast now.
Honestly, I don't really know what the number is because I've been doing it long enough that I'm on my, I think, third host provider, or fourth, actually, I guess. And so I don't have all of the numbers for some of the original years, but of course they were smaller years. But yeah, we tend to get more than 1 million downloads a year. So yeah, these days at least.
Great. And what do you think makes it so popular?
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to my guests because the show is often an interview show, and so I'm talking to, quite often interesting people who are from a destination or who wrote the book sometimes on the destination. They're literally the person who wrote the guidebook on it, or they're just somebody who can tell a good yarn and can really put the listener into the place of where they're going. So, in fact, the going to Tonga and swimming with whales, it's somebody who is not a travel writer, not a travel blogger or podcaster. He's a lawyer in Atlanta, Georgia, but he pinged me one time and sent me an email saying, I don't know if this would be of any interest to you, but I went to Tonga and I swam with whales and I took underwater pictures and also took a hydrophone and have whale song. Would that be of any interest to you at all? And so Chris, who's the person in question there, has just been on the show for the 7th time, I think, talking about all sorts of interesting places to go and take pictures of wildlife. We have a show coming up with him in about a month about going to Indonesia and taking pictures of Komodo dragons. So occasionally we get to do some fun, interesting, exotic things that will challenge people. Of course, not quite as far from where you're coming from as it is from where a lot of my listeners are in North America are coming from, although it's listened around the globe these days.
Yep. We I guess that's one thing we have in Australia that's quite lucky is all the islands are not too far away, but
right.
The rest of the world is quite far away. So Chris, you've been doing this since 2005, as you said. You clearly know amateur. So what's behind the name of the podcast? Is it targeted towards
absolutely, I'm still an amateur. Now,
okay.
You have to remember, we have to do a little linguistic definition here of what an amateur is. If you look at the word comes from the same word as amas and amore. If you know your Latin, it literally means to do something for the love of it. You may recall that all your Olympic athletes used to be amateur athletes and still the best in the world, so they were just doing it for the love of it. So the one thing I like to point out to people is remember that the Titanic was built by professionals and the Ark was built by an amateur. So, just because I'm an amateur traveler doesn't mean I don't know a thing or two about it.
You mentioned the Olympics there. I've actually been quite entertained. I don't know if you've seen the Sochi Problems Twitter account.
Right. They weren't entirely ready for the Olympics, it seems like, at least some of the where
they can throw plenty of money at it, but it doesn't seem quite finished. So on that line of topic, I guess what's the worst accommodation that you've ever stayed in your travels?
Sometimes it's not so much that it's the worst accommodation, but it's the worst timing. I think one of the worst nights we ever had was staying above a beer hall in Germany during Pinksterfest. It was the night before I think we were supposed to do a transcontinental airplane ride, and so we were kind of looking for a little more quiet than we were getting there with large raucous bands of drunken Germans singing till all hours of the night. So that was an experience, I think, in terms of...
So you wouldn't have had much sleep that night, I guess?
Not a whole lot.
So Chris, when you're traveling, do you prefer getting off the beaten track, or do you like meeting the locals, or do you want to go and do all the normal tourist kind of things so you don't miss those? What's what's your normal sort of travel technique?
Yes. Yes, I do. All those things. So, I mean, part of it does depend. So, for instance, I'm going to Jordan in May with the tourism board. They're bringing me over because they'd like to show off their country. And, you know, one of the things I said is, it is my first trip to Jordan. I do want to get to Petra. Because it is one of the amazing sites in the world, and yes, all the tourists go there, but I would like to see it, and I would like to see Amman. But after that, it's like, I don't know I don't know anything about your country, or I don't know as much about your country as you do. You know, surprise me in some ways. And I've had some real wonderful experiences having, you know, not always formal guides like that who know their country, but for instance, I was in Oaxaca, Mexico, and I just, you know, started a conversation, or someone started a conversation with me in the Zocalo, in the central square of the town, and he was a local weaver, and his family had probably been in the Oaxaca area for about 2,500 years. They were Zapotec, so they weren't Spanish, but were one of the native peoples of Mexico. And he, after we talked for a while, he offered me, "Do you want me to show you around my area?" And so I went off with him as my tour guide. And so sometimes it's, you know, if you can interact with the locals, you can come away with just a amazing experience. Not only was he my, you know, tour guide to some of the places where the tourists go, but also then we went to his house and he showed me the way that you make weaving, the way that you do weaving in this age-old tradition, including that their red dye, for instance, that they used, they ground up what they call the cochineal, which is a bug that you find on cactus. So they ground up these bugs and make them into red dye and such. And so his granddaughter his daughter and his granddaughter showed me how to do all this dyeing and weaving, and it was just a fascinating experience. So I think that, you know, you definitely, when you go to Paris, you go up in the Eiffel Tower. Absolutely, sure. Why not? Everybody does it. Yes, it's cliche. You ought to do it anyway. But also, it's nice to try and discover some of the places where people don't go, or to meet up with some of the locals and learn about some of the things that you wouldn't learn. You know, one of the things I don't like to do is I don't like to do the big bus tour, which is, you know, a glass window between you and the whole rest of the world you're visiting, or the big isolated hotel that's all-inclusive and you don't get out and meet any of the locals. I don't find that to be quite as interesting an experience in travel. So we tend to focus a little more on, you know, getting a little more in touch with the local context, the local history, the local culture and such.
Yeah. So you get a good view of both sides of it. You get to see all the exciting things and get to know a bit more of what the locals see, I guess.
Right. No, there are different styles of traveling. Mine tends to be, I'd rather do a little more, you know, local transportation and a little more rubbing shoulders with people. Yeah.
You mentioned Jordan. I went there when I was 3 years old, I think, with my parents, so I don't really remember it other than seeing the photos, but I'm sure it's quite amazing and you'll have a great time there. So
looking forward to it.
If you had to choose, Chris, a particular type of destination to visit, what would be your favorite, like beach or city or out in the country somewhere? Do you have a favorite type of destination?
I do have a favorite type of destination, but it would probably not be one of your parameters there. It would probably be old.
Okay.
Huge history buff. And so, you know, when I go someplace like Egypt or Istanbul or Greece, you know, Santorini, Athens, or someplace like that, I'm just beside myself enjoying, you know, the history and the richness of the culture. And of course, I grew up someplace here where, you know, old for us is 200 years. So going someplace that has,
very much the same here, you know, in Australia, you know, it's
right, exactly,
buildings and recorded history and things. It only goes back a couple of hundred years. So.
I enjoyed going to, you know, you're looking at the Great Pyramids in Egypt, in Giza, and they're telling you that the old kingdom that built this was so long ago that we don't know the names of the people that toppled the old kingdom, and we don't know the people that invaded Egypt and took over it. It's just so long ago we've forgotten them. But we do know that they had a new technological advantage that the Egyptians didn't have, which was the wheel. It's like, you know, just can't even imagine that kind of old. So
yeah, it's a huge scale. It's hard to imagine.
Right.
So have you done much road tripping in your time traveling? Do you have a favorite road trip memory at all?
Well, I love road trips. Yes, definitely done some road trips, including all the way across the U.S. Um, and the U.S. actually, if you haven't done a road trip, especially in the southwest, let's say, of the U.S., we have some of the American national parks are some of my favorite spots for road trips. So one of the road trips that I did just by myself down to Grand Canyon and to Bryce and Zion National Park, which are just stunning natural beauty. I don't want to rag on the Three Sisters there, but if you'd been to Bryce, you may not have thought about making it a national park. That's all I'm saying. Bryce is just one of the most beautiful spots on earth, or Antelope Canyon, which is a Navajo Nation national park. So it's not a U.S. national park, but it's an Indian national park, and it is a slot canyon. Which, if you look at pictures from the southwest of the U.S. and look up Slot Canyon, you will definitely see pictures of this one small canyon that is just beautiful, the way the light plays off it. So that's one of my favorite things in terms of road trips. But my other favorite road trip, I'll give you two, was I happened to be out of the country when the men landed on the moon. I was on a road trip with my family, and I watched that event happen from a trailer park in Victoria, British Columbia, up in Canada. And it's interesting on a very famous day, a very, a day that people are aware of, to look at it from another point of view, to look at it at your country from outside your country was a very memorable and probably formative experience for me.
Yeah, I guess that's a favorite road trip from a more personal side, which is great as well.
Right. Yeah, you can't recreate that one as much, but
yeah, just tell people to wait for the next moon landing and go on a road trip.
That's right.
Great. And talking about road trips and driving, have you ever had any standout, either good or bad, experiences renting a car? Perhaps something, have you discovered anything strange left behind in the car, or any standout experiences?
The only bad experience I can think of renting a car was we rented a car when I was in high school. We went and did a 2,000-mile road trip, 3,200-kilometer road trip in eastern United States to see a lot of the historic sites, because if we do have history, it's on the other end of the continent from where I grew up in California. And it was one of those where we were picking up the car one place and dropping it off someplace else, and someone just basically sent their problem car with us so they would get rid of it. So it was one of those, my dad saying, hey, the car's tires are low. Oh, yeah, we fixed them. Well, they didn't. They fixed them. They put enough air in them for us to get away, and of course we woke up the next day to flat tires. But
yeah. Sounds like generally you've had an okay experience then, apart from that one or two times.
No, I'd say some of the best experiences we've had on trips have been, get a car and explore Europe, for instance, or drive around Ireland and see all the little places in Ireland. It was funny. We were in one spot in Ireland. I think we were in Kilkenny, and our guide said you should go this route to get over to the coast because it's picturesque. I don't know what route in Ireland isn't picturesque, so I don't know what they were talking about. It was a very pretty route, but every road we drove on in Ireland was pretty. So it's
I guess
wonderful
that's
experiences.
The between, you said you don't like to do bus tours because you're separated by glass, and the other thing is, if you take your own car, you can stop wherever you want, whenever you want, and stay however long you need to.
One of the best experiences we had, that the first time I went to Europe, we did a rental car, and we went into the city of I think it was Strasbourg, and we were looking at what hotels we'd stay in, and we looked at a place that was kind of a flop house. The beds were canoe shaped, and it was not in the best part of town, and I just kind of had it with the city, and we had a car. It's just one of those, let's get out of the city. And we drove just a little further out of the city, and we found this little tiny walled town on the Rue de Vin, the wine road in the Alsace, called Mützig. And it was this beautiful, picturesque town, and had found this old hotel with a big claw-toed, freestanding bathtub that my wife relaxed in while we went off and back in the city. It was just one of those, I'm so glad we had the freedom, because we had a car, to go someplace else, to go explore a little and to have that flexibility. And then the next day we got up, and because we had the car again, we were driving down the Rue de Vin, and you could just explore. You could stop at, look, there's a picture here that looks like there's ruins of a castle. Let's go explore. And if you're doing a car trip, and I love a good road trip, that's really what you want to do, is you want to look at the places on the map that you've never heard of, and stop and explore, whether that be some kitschy, U.S. biggest ball of string, or some ruined castle in France, or I don't know what the Australian equivalent of that is, but I love a good road trip.
We have a lot of big things, like biggest ball of string or whatever. Got, I think, about 200 of them roadsides, just random big things.
Oh yeah.
So, Chris, when you've been perhaps getting off the beaten track, or maybe even in the city, is there anything really amusing that's happened to you? Do you have a funniest story from your travels?
I think sometimes the funniest stories are not necessarily what's happening, but how we are reacting to them and the people that you go with. So I think we went to the Alhambra in Granada. Beautiful, beautiful, castle, palace, one of the last Moorish strongholds in Spain that fell to the Reconquistadors. And we're seeing this beautiful thing. We're listening to the historic guide, but the problem is the historic guide is wildly over the top, taking itself so seriously. And my family we have a sense of humor, and so the person in the audio guide was talking about, I think he was telling us one of the stories of the Alhambra, and it may have been something from Washington Irving, the American author who popularized to a lot of outsiders outside of Spain the Alhambra, because this was in ruins and people had really forgotten about it a lot. And so we're reading this, listening to this audio guide, and it's saying, to hear the bell of the villa, all of the terrible things that this person would do to themselves. I would walk over glass to hear the bell of the villa. I would do, and my son is listening to this, and he starts repeating to us what they're saying, but then he just starts making up things that the audio guide is saying. So, sometimes the most enjoyable part of your trip is not where you are, it's who you're with.
Yeah. Got to have good company when you're traveling.
Absolutely, especially on a road trip. Let's go back to that.
Yeah. Are we there yet?
Yeah.
So, Chris, your background is in tech, and you've worked in Silicon Valley for a long time in the US.
Still do. Yeah.
You still do, yeah. So, working for some quite big companies, I guess, like TripAdvisor and big tech giants like IBM and Apple and whatnot. Have you got any plans to start your own tech travel-related company? Thinking.
Well, I'm in the process of starting my own company, actually,
Okay.
but not specifically travel-related. Somewhat tangentially travel-related. I've got a new website called bloggerbridge.com, which is helping people, like companies like you, for instance, who want to get in touch with bloggers, podcasters, or whatever, starting in the travel space, but going into other spaces as well, to connect up and find people, and then to also know when those people happen to be, wandering through their neighborhoods, to be able to say, let me know when somebody like this happens to be in Adelaide or whatever. So yeah, that's actually in beta right now. So.
Oh, that sounds good. So, do you think working for yourself now that you'll have more time to travel?
Well, that is the plan, and I have, since I quit the day job, and I've gone part-time. I've gone part-time with, actually back at TripAdvisor, where I was a director of engineering. I'm doing some contracting for them now, but that, I've got a press trip planned to Dusseldorf for Carnival, come out here in 2 weeks. I've got the trip, as I mentioned, to Jordan in May. I've got a trip to Louisiana in August. Since I quit the job, I went over to Nevada, a nearby state here from California, and participated in the camel races. So I'm, trying to take advantage of some of that flexibility of being a little more location independent.
Yeah, that's the goal for travelers, I guess. Try and find
absolutely
a job where you can be location independent.
Or to win the lottery, but that just seems like you have a lot less control about that.
Yeah, the odds maybe aren't so good for that one.
No, the odds are not always with us.
So, Chris, just a couple of last questions. If you were stranded on a desert island for a month and you could only take one item, apart from the obvious, a boat or a rescue helicopter or something. If you could only take one item, what would it be?
Well, do I have the internet? That would be part of the question there. That might influence the decision there, because one of the things that I am just constantly on is my smartphone, but obviously if I don't have the internet, that's not quite as useful. If I could load that up with travel podcasts and other podcasts, though, so that I could listen to that few audiobooks and things, I'd probably take that. That'll keep me busy for a while.
Yeah.
But,
fair enough. And so last question, a bit of a travel tip, I guess, for our watchers or readers. What's your tip to get the most out of visiting a new destination?
Well, besides, listen to your favorite travel podcast and find out ahead of time, and actually somewhat serious with that, it's great to look at some of the resources of the people who've been there ahead of you, whether that be blogs or podcasts or guidebooks and such. I mean, part of what that is just knowing what's available that you might be interested in, and you don't have to be interested in everything that your blogger, your travel writer, or whatever is interested in. Also, as a very visual person, I'm a photographer. I love to take pictures when I travel, and one of the things I do is I hit the postcard rack. These are all the pretty pictures of this area. Do I even recognize what they are all of? Because occasionally you'll say, I don't know what that is. Where do I get to there? And so that's one of those, when you're on the ground, just look around for some of the local resources also. And the postcard rack is an interesting way to do that.
Yeah, I have to say I'm with you on the photography thing there. I think most of my holidays are planned around looking up photos first on the internet and then finding out how to get to those places to take some great photos. Much to the dismay of my traveling companions. But,
yes. Well, there's that whole piece of how many travel photos do you really need of that cathedral. I've been told the answer is not 100.
Thanks for joining us today, Chris, and sharing a bit of an insight into your wonderful travel world. So do you want to just remind us again where our readers can get more of your travels on your podcast or website?
Sure. You can find all of both the two podcasts I do. I do Amateur Traveler and also do This Week in Travel at amateurtraveler.com, and also articles and lots of photos there.
Great. We'll link those in the bottom of the video. Thanks for your time, Chris.
Thanks for having me.